Hey, thank you everyone for dialing in today. Welcome to ARPA-E University. For those of you who don't know, ARPA-E University is a series of webinars designed to assist the energy technology community in advancing innovations that can dramatically improve how we generate, store, and use energy. Originally, ARPA-E University focused exclusively on technology to market topics like cost modeling, finance, and business models. And now we are expanding ARPA-E University to include technical webinars and office hours with ARPA-E staff. This past April, we hosted the first ARPA-E University office hour session, which was a 30-minute live open Q&A with ARPA-E Program Director Ilan Gur. Please look for these new types of ARPA-E University sessions in the coming months. Today's edition of ARPA-E University is a technology to market session, and our topic is working with the Department of Defense. Today's webinar builds on a panel discussion on military applications in your future that was held this past February at the 2013 ARPA-E Summit. Two housekeeping notes. First, we will be taking questions at the end of today's session. In order to ask a question, it's important that you use the Q&A box, not the chat box. The Q&A box can be found if you move your cursor to the top of your screen. You should see a green bar and a drop-down menu will appear. Select the Q&A box to ask your question. And the questions will be put in a queue. If you have a question during the presentation, you can go ahead and enter it then, but we will take the questions at the end. If you have a technical difficulty, please use the chat box. You should be able to have both the default for Q&A and chat to all panelists. So make sure that you send your Q&A and your technical request through chat to all panelists. Our second and final housekeeping note is that a recording of today's webinar and a copy of the presentation slides will be made available within a week on the ARPA-E website, and you'll receive an email later today with the appropriate link. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Deborah Jelen. Ms. Jelen is the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of Electricore, a nonprofit organization established at the request of DARPA to advance technology. Deborah has over 25 years of experience in program and product management roles in the defense, aerospace, automotive, and alternative energy marketplaces, including leadership roles at AeroVironment, Hughes Aircraft Company, and Olin Aerospace's Rocket Research Company. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from UC Santa Barbara and a Master of Science in Systems Engineering from the University of Southern California. Deborah, thank you for joining us today.
Adam, and thank you for having me here at ARPA-E University.
Great. Well, we will pass the WebEx controls to you so that you'll be able to bring your presentation up. And everyone, just please bear with us. We'll take a moment to make that transition. And again, if you're just joining us and you're curious, if you run into technical difficulties along the way, know that the recording of the webinar today and a copy of Ms. Jelen's slides will be available on the ARPA-E website within a week. And Deborah's presentation is coming up, and you're good to go.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here today on the discussion topic, looking at these factors to consider for success in the pursuit of DOD business. You know, Electricore has been around for over 20 years, and over that time we've developed a collaborative approach that we found successful with the Department of Energy, Transportation, and Department of Defense. Today I'll be talking about some factors of that collaborative approach and discussing the use of teaming as a competitive advantage and as a path to overcoming barriers that small businesses may encounter in competing for DOD business. The agenda we'll follow today, we'll look at a couple of key differences between DOE and DOD programs, why this market is compelling even for small businesses to consider. We'll talk most of the first part of the discussion about teaming. We'll hit briefly on compliance and screening, and then we'll try to leave about 30 minutes at the end for questions and discussions. Getting right into it, there are a couple of key differences between working with the Department of Energy and Defense. Department of Energy really focuses in market areas and funding research and developments that drive technology breakthrough. These are transformative science and technology breakthroughs, and it's really focused on the technology. You'll find that DOD is quite different. DOD focuses on solutions. They're a requirements-based organization. So they're selecting solutions that will include technology breakthroughs, but they're intent on fulfilling a mission. They've got to get the job done, and sometimes that may even be using a less sophisticated technology solution, but they've got to have a full suite of solution if they move forward with a product into their marketplace. An example where I've seen DOD use solutions that were maybe less sophisticated during my time with AeroVironment. AeroVironment had developed a small unmanned air vehicle, just a remotely piloted plane, flies low and slow and quiet. DOD was prior to that using satellite imagery and helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft for recon and surveillance. And AeroVironment was able to fulfill with these much less sophisticated and less expensive approach to small UAV a need for local surveillance that was very compelling and led to growth for them in the marketplace, and they eventually became the leader in small UAVs. Another big difference between DOE and DOD is that DOE is not typically the end customer, and so you may work 4 years with DOE and achieve breakthroughs, but you will still have to work a path to market. And in working with DOD can be a source, a very good source actually, of research and development funding, but you can also have a built-in customer with DOD. One example of this is using the SBIR process. The SBIR process on the DOD side works very similarly to DOE's SBIR process. There's phase 1 and 2, same sizes. They follow a similar cycle, though at a different time of the year. However, if the technology develops into something that can be used by DOD, DOD may move forward into a phase 3 and offer sole source arrangements or give preference to that technology, and in order to take it into the marketplace and use it. We've seen some very large growth in product adoption come out of these SBIR cycles. DOE typically requires cost share for their awards, somewhere between 20 and 50%, depending on the cycle that the technology is in. DOD typically does not require cost share, so that is nice. And one area that may be new to you, as you accept a DOE award, you can typically schedule the work for that award around your other business. However, DOD, if a technology is identified as critical to national security, they do have the option to place what they call rated orders, and those orders must come before your other business. And so if it's something that ends up being critical to DOD, you will have to actually provide some priority to that business by law. And so that's a couple of the differences in working with DOE and DOD. So why pursue this DOD business with its extra barriers and requirements? Well, the reason is it's a very compelling market. The Department of Defense spent more than $600 billion in 2012. Much of that, more than $70 billion, was in research and development, test and evaluation. And DOD is very committed to solutions from small businesses. The Small Business Administration reports over $61 billion of purchases from small businesses by DOD. And perhaps particularly of interest to this ARPA-E community would be the DOD SBIR and STTR awards. DOD's budget for that in the last reported year, which was 2010, is over $1 billion. You can see in the chart that I provided at the x-axis are the agencies that participate in the SBIR program, and then the amount of funding that they've awarded through these mechanisms, over $300 million for the Air Force, and the number at the top of each column is the number of awards. So the Air Force was about $325 million of awards, and over 967 awards. The market, there's been a lot of discussion about the DOD budget, and certainly there are cuts there with the implementation of furloughs. There will be some slowing of contracting. However, DOD, especially on the SBIR side, is still a very good targeted opportunity for small businesses and a compelling market for small businesses to consider entering into, especially as a way to start your work with DOD. So how do you go about pursuing this DOD business? And do you need a team? There are challenges of going it alone, but it is possible. If you're able to fulfill all of the attributes that DOD requires of its partners, then you can go alone. I will tell you that is fairly uncommon for a small business to possess all of the attributes that are needed. And in my experience, small companies have found far greater success working on teams with DOD than going it alone. On the left-hand side of this chart, I've listed some successful attributes that DOD partners have and display, and on the right side, talked a little bit about how those come to fruition. The first one is the ability to communicate their solution. If you talk to DOD reviewers, the most common thing they run into with proposals is that the proposer talks a lot about the technology and a lot about what they do, but they don't translate that information into how it's useful for DOD. And so in building a team and communicating a solution, we have to get deliberate and say, here is how you use this technology. Here is how DOD uses this technology. It's very important. Credibility, a lot of the ARPA-E technology providers are very experienced in their technology realm. However, we do also have to, for DOD, provide relevant experience, and that may be mission-related, not technology-related. It may be path-to-market related and how to deploy a technology into the battlefield. And DOD is also, quite frankly, looking for the team to have resources to mitigate some of the risk. So if there are bumps in the road, will the team be able to address those bumps in the road? Will they have those resources of funding, staffing to address it and not cause a schedule delay or come back to DOD for solutions? Something about DOD, the DOD attribute is that it's got to be complete. It must fulfill all of the engineering, test, manufacturing, logistics expectations. It's far beyond the technology. And so in proposals, depending on the stage of the technology development, we've got to have thought through how is the solution going to move into the marketplace. And really the question that's being asked there is, can this technology survive that valley of death? Department of Energy and ARPA-E have a similar requirement where they work with companies to determine their paths to market, and it is a good business practice. It allows us to avoid our critical issues down the road and not get stuck. And so DOD does something similar there when they're looking for complete solutions. DOD attribute is cost-effective. The solution has to be cost-effective. It can't be orders of magnitude more than what's being used right now. If it's adding new capability, it's got to be at a reasonable cost, saving lives or some other very significant benefit. And DOD looks at life cycle costs, not just purchase price, not just R&D costs. When you're working on a DOD team, you have to be careful with compliance. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a later slide, but it's basically investing in the infrastructure to comply with all the DOD regulations. And then, DOD is very interested in state-of-the-art. They invest an awful lot of money to move the state-of-the-art, and it is a differentiating factor, technology, but it's only part of the winning solution. So I wake up every morning ready to compete, and I don't want to be out there in the marketplace alone, and I recommend that other small companies consider using teaming as a way for success and to deal with challenges. I like to convey some of those now. In working on a team, here at Electricore, as we build these teams, we try to have each of the partners focus on what they know. These are world-class technology partners, and we want them to stay in their area of expertise and not drag them into areas that are perhaps handled better by someone else. And in a team, we can often do this. We try to team up organizations that are a good fit, and so that have either cultures where working together is important, or perhaps they're both stakeholders in a new market. If there is not a great fit, it's really important to engage a team lead. So somebody that is calling the shots on behalf of the sponsor, that is helping to delineate the responsibilities, and then working to keep the team on schedule, on track in all of the different pieces. when you go out there to find a team member, there's a few ways to approach it. One of the recommendations I would give, especially if you're looking at the DOD, is to follow the work that's in progress. There is a lot of public information available, so look at your technology area, find the DOD office that is the center for that technology area, and then follow the work progress there. They will publish the roadmaps for the work that they're conducting. They'll identify the challenges that they're facing, and you'll see the funding follow those challenges. There you can also see the companies that are involved in addressing these technology challenges, and they may be potential partners for you. Another area where you may be able to find potential partners is at conferences. I'm not a huge fan of conferences. I think you have to be very selective in how you use them, but there are a couple that I try to attend every year. The ESTCP, which is a DOD program for energy, is very good. The DOE Merit Review is a very good conference and has representatives from not just DOE, but a lot of DOD folks there and DOT as well. And then I also attended the ARPA-E conference this year, and I thought that was very well attended by DOD as well. So consider targeted conference attendance as a way to find a team member. But probably the biggest area that you're going to use is reaching out through your business network, making those contacts, using your contacts to build your teams, because those are probably the organizations that fit best with your company. The structure of a team matters greatly. If you do have a team lead, that gives you the opportunity to substitute team members if something goes wrong. I've had this happen many times, especially with small companies that either go through a change in ownership or a change in incorporation. And if you have a team lead that's holding the prime contract and an assignability clause in your flow-down agreement, it can be pretty graceful and can move things along quickly, rather than having to go back to the DOD and have a contract mod, which is a big deal. The other thing that you can address in structures of teams is intellectual property. Here at Electricore, we try to leave all of the intellectual property in the member that brought it, and we set up as best we can firewalls so that we limit the amount of interaction that has to be done on a technical level in order to protect intellectual property of the holders. And that works actually very well. Teaming can be a big strategic advantage, but there are challenges with teaming, and the one that comes up the most often is that you have to share the funding. There's never quite enough money to get everything done, and if you build a team and you break up the requirements among the team members, then the funding goes too. And so that's probably the top reason that I hear from small companies why they do not want a team. However, and there's also some concerns about losing IP, although I think that is manageable. I really spent a lot of time talking about the value of teaming and how teaming can compensate for areas of weakness that exist. It gives a small company access to facilities and expertise. They can overcome some barriers that they might have to pay for otherwise by letting a team member take that piece. A larger team member may bring knowledge and experience. But also politics and relationships. They're never written in the RFQs, but they do come into play in some cases. And so the sponsor's sitting there looking at all of the options in front of them and trying to understand which of them has the least perceived risk to the government. And if you're on a team and you have a team that has all of these attributes that we discussed, you will have less perceived risk than if it's a small company sitting there on their own. But by far and large, the reason that I encourage teaming is it increases the probability of winning. The House Armed Services Committee went out into the small business community last year, and they conducted a series of panel discussions around the United States. And they asked small businesses, what are the challenges of doing business with DOD? And across the board, and I was able to attend the panel discussion in my region, without any regard for anything else, the biggest issue that small companies brought up was compliance. Small companies enter into business maybe with good existing business systems that have been adequate to run the business so far, and they assume doing business with DOD with those systems and good intentions will be enough. It is not. The DOD has some very specific requirements for business systems. It does require some investment from the company. The systems don't have to be sophisticated, but they do have to meet the requirements. So, for instance, there's a requirement for internal controls that the DOD must see. Here at Electricore, we've done that with a simple flow chart, and we update it regularly, but it's not a sophisticated means, but it meets the requirement just fine. The systems don't have to be automated, but they must be documented. So we use here at Electricore, we use a QuickBooks accounting program. It's not an expensive program. It works very well, and it does allow us to document all of the transactions that need to be done in order to be in compliance with the government. The problem with it is if you go forward without these systems, it is possible to win an award. However, it's very difficult to get paid. And so it's really important to address these systemic issues early in the process. There are a couple of, I don't know if you'd call them loopholes, but opportunities for interacting with DOD that don't require the extensive system investment. One, if you have very low funding, maybe under $100,000, and you're subcontracting, there are options for less documentation and less systems. Although you still do have to document how you spent the funding. And if you have a product, and that product has been sold into the commercial marketplace, it is possible to price that product to DOD based on your commercial pricing, and that also would alleviate some of these investments in business systems I discussed. Government payment actually has gotten much better over the years. They use a system called Wide Area Workflow. Small businesses typically allowed to invoice twice a month, every 2 weeks, and if you're compliant with all your reporting, it goes very well. It's a very good system. And then the last thing on compliance is the government's audit agency, DCAA, and their contracts management agency, DCMA, do require yearly audits and reporting. And these are significant. Probably will require the support of a qualified cost accountant, and so you want to take that into account when you're looking at compliance. I'd like to move now to screening opportunities and talk a little bit about when you're out there on Fed BizOps or maybe looking at the DLA ordering schedules. How to screen these opportunities and determine if an opportunity is right for your business. One of the most important pieces on looking at screening is determining if the funding is really available. DOD does communicate frequently through these mechanisms we discussed, and I provided you those the links to FBO and DLA in a later slide, and it's available on the ARPA-E website. But as you look at Fed BizOps, you will see lots of calls for requirements, and some of them are actually source selection, where there is funding available and DOD is preparing to buy. However, DOD does use that mechanism also for their planning purposes, and so sometimes what you will see is sources sought, where they're looking for sources so that they can put it into their planning, determine if competition exists, but there's not actually funding to purchase yet. And so you do want to be very careful in watching to see if is the funding at a phase of requirements development, has it been budgeted, has Congress appropriated the money, or are we finally to the point of source selection that could lead to award and contracting? As you read through those solicitations, DOD solicitations are typically written quite well, so you'll have a good understanding of the investment that would be required in your infrastructure in order to fulfill the requirements. Once in a while, cost share is required, in most cases not with DOD. Another big issue with screening opportunities is considering the procurement timing. Often the DOD cycle is quite long, and a small company needs to decide, one, are they willing to wait that long for funding, and two, will the funding still be applicable to the phase of their business when they receive it, if it's a year or 18 months later? An example of this is the ESTCP program, again, this energy program that the DOD Office of Secretary of Defense runs. That program runs on a cycle. In February, there is a list of topic areas, and a 5-page white paper goes in. And then in April, those topics of interest are invited to full proposal. Over the summer, there's a request for an oral defense of the proposal, and in the fall, those that are selected go to Washington and provide further verbal comments on their proposal. And then in November or December, there's an award made with contracting typically by January or February of the following year. So you look at that cycle, it's been over 1 year since we started the process of the white paper. And so the funding, that's the earliest that the funding is going to move is 12 months. And so if you're in a company where your technology cycle is evolving very quickly, you may find that a year later the technology proposed is not where you're at and may not be as relevant to the work that's going on. As you're looking at opportunities with DOD, be careful about screening out topics of interest. And when you do find a topic that isn't quite a fit, really step back and consider whether or not teaming could bring the missing pieces to you that you could be successful and a strong contender for the DOD business. So in conclusion, teaming is a practical, strategic matter, and small companies should really consider teaming in pursuit of DOD partnerships in a way to increase their probabilities of success. So at this time, Adam, I'd like to go ahead and move into questions and discussion.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Just a reminder to everyone who's dialed in, if you do want to submit a question, please use the Q&A box. To access that, it's at the top of your screen. Move your cursor to where you see a green bar, and it will drop down and submit your question to all panelists. Deborah, to get started, we have a question coming in. Folks just want to learn a little bit more about Electricore and what do you do and how do you work with small businesses, just to kind of get a lay of the land from where you're coming from.
Thank you. Yes, Electricore is a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation, so we're not owned by any stakeholders. We were formed by at the request of the Department of Defense. The DOD wanted to group together at the time geographic collaborators and have them work on issues of energy and transportation together. And so we are a consortium of companies. Our participating companies join the consortium each year, and then we spend our time watching for opportunities, and then building teams of the consortium members and others to go after this business. And so what we'll do is a lot of the DOD R&D and DOE and DOT as well can be very useful if it overlays the IR&D work of a company. And so we try to understand the research and development goals of the companies that are participating in the consortium, and we specifically do target funding that is in those areas. We add members to the consortium all the time. Oftentimes we're missing a skill set, and we'll go out and recruit a member to join the team. And then, but the bulk of our effort is actually writing proposals, and then on the programs that we win, we're a success-based organization. We've got to win in order to have a program. Then we actually do the program management, and Electricore conducts all the administrative program management, invoicing, reporting, contracting, and the participating organizations bring their technical pieces to the table, and they receive the bulk of the funding for the technology development.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll come back to talk a little bit more about Electricore as well. Some other questions there. But moving to, I think you've persuaded us that, unless you're an experienced large institution, teaming is going to be important for your success in working with DOD. The question here is, what's the makeup of teams that DOD typically encourages? Do they have a certain percentage of industry and academia, government lab? How does that, and just in your experience, maybe are there certain DOD procurements where it's actually explicit, the team needs to be made up of these kinds of partners, or if that isn't the case, just looking at your experience, I think, Electricore has been in operation for almost over for 20 years, and what do you think, if that isn't explicitly requested, kind of what traditionally has worked?
Sure. Well, the answer is, of course, it depends on the type of funding that's moving, and the budget is very large on the DOD side, so there are lots of different types of programs. There are definitely explicit requirements on some of the funding, and so we do see funding that comes through that must go to a university. We see funding come through that must go to the laboratories. However, the bulk of the funding is open for competition, and when you look at the solicitation, it will say very clearly on there what the eligibility requirements are. And the teams that we build are typically partnerships of private and public agencies. So if you think about the way that the government's spending money, they're spending money to address issues that aren't being taken care of on the private side on its own by R&D. And so it's something that has to be in the public interest, or there wouldn't be government dollars being spent on it. So oftentimes the composition of the teams that we bring together are private companies with key technologies, then possibly a larger corporation that can bring the infrastructure that we need. And an example of that might be support overseas, or depots overseas with warehouses with spare parts. And then we oftentimes will include a public agency, someone like the Army Corps of Engineers. So I have a program that we're doing that's energy related, where we're installing a new concentrating solar product at a military base. And on that one, we actually engaged the Army Corps of Engineers to look at the data and to tell us, one, it gives a nice objective review of the data to our sponsor, but two, they're kind of guiding us to make sure that we stay within DOD missions, because in this case we're using a COTS, or commercial off-the-shelf product, and so we want to make sure that we have that DOD mission side on our team, and we were able to engage a public agency to do that. And so that's probably my favorite grouping of companies on a team.
And that makes a lot of sense. And then in our preparation for this call, they had an example just to kind of highlight that for folks on the phone if you didn't catch it. The idea that you might have a great technology, you've got a prototype that's working, but the DOD will look at its, your ability to sort of service its development and testing maybe in facilities and locations that you don't have access to. So that, I think, is sort of a very clear one. Even if you've got something that's functional, the sort of specialization in different geographies, forward operating bases and others is a key point. I think there's another, taking a conversation a bit of a different direction, but, someone is asking here, what if you have a unique and disruptive technology, but you're not sure what exact applications DOD, how it would apply, like where that disruptive technology would apply and what DOD is procuring. What I like about that question is that it gets at, that's kind of a challenge, and I know we here at ARPA-E are constantly working with the technology community to say, it's wonderful that you've got this first ever proven best in class, but you need to tell a story of how that technology is going to fit into a balanced system, or how will that impact the market in our energy landscape. But could you talk to, beyond, you mentioned in your presentation looking for work in progress reports and the roadmaps, are there other ways that people can go about thinking about, okay, here's what I have, where would this apply?
Absolutely, and this is a really common issue, that there's a great technology, it's coming to fruition, it's ready for the market. Now, how do we apply it? Because most folks don't even know it exists. So what you have to do is look for the opportunity to engage one of the DOD stakeholders. So you need to talk with someone that is either in the science and technology realm with responsibility for that. So there are centers of, say, energy storage excellence. There are centers at DOD for biofuel development. So find someone in the correct technology realm that you can engage. You have a couple of options to do that. You might attend an industry conference that they're attending and informally speak with them there, or have a booth and invite them to your booth. Some agencies will entertain a meeting if you reach out to them, give them a short description of the technology and the stage that it's at, and ask to come in and introduce the technology. And many of the DOD folks are quite generous with their time in looking at technology. You know, they do have the responsibility to assess state of the art, and they are always looking for innovation. And so having a meeting is definitely an option, but you need to do a little footwork to make sure it's with the right folks. And then the other way that you can get some feedback on your technology is to propose it. So you could propose, if there's an SBIR topic that is broad enough and directed in your area, you could write an SBIR Phase 1 proposal and receive feedback. There are various other opportunities that come on the street that give you the chance to write first a 5-page white paper. Like if it's an energy-related advancement, the ESTCP program office uses a 5-page white paper first before full proposal, and so it will give you the chance to make sure that they're interested in your technology before you invest much time in a full proposal.
Great. ARPA-E, we believe in that too, trying to use opportunities to get your idea out in a short format before you invest a lot of time and filling it out completely. Maybe just a practical question, and if it's in your appendix, folks can get that downloaded. But just when you talked about the roadmaps and the work in progress, you know, you've mentioned a website, FedBizOps, a few times. Are there other just websites where, you know, you can start going to find the technology roadmaps that you've talked about? Because I feel like, you know, if you're kind of starting at square one, you don't have your network built out yet in the defense world to go set up a meeting, starting with that roadmap might be good. But even, you know, aside from sending us to Google, are there particular places that those get posted, and are those easy to find?
I guess the answer is they're not necessarily easy to find. The DOD is a very large organization, you know, with multiple agencies, and different arms of the military often are designated as leads for different technologies, and so it does take some footwork. Just a note, like FedBizOps. FedBizOps is www.fbo.gov. And that's the government's central warehouse for all solicitations. So anything the government's procuring that's more than about $25,000 will flow through FedBizOps. And so it is, even if you're not looking for solicitations, it is a good area to go in and see who's buying and what they're buying. So you can search FedBizOps by topic area. You can go in and set up a search engine with keywords or agencies, and it will send you an email every day to let you know if there's something new that's come through the system. So it's actually a very, very good system. So when I'm looking for the appropriate home for a new technology or an application of a new technology, I do normally start with some searching. I'll go in and look at publications, and I do use a lot of Google searches. Searching on DOD, and then sometimes each of the branches in DOD, and the keyword searches for the technology. If it's early stage technology, it is most likely at one of the labs, at the Army lab, the Navy lab, or the Air Force lab. And so I think that your listeners will find that it's pretty easy to find those folks and narrow down to the office that has responsibility. And then in regards to gaining the information from that office, check their command reports. The DOD does do a very good job of planning every year. They have a formal planning process called PPB&E. It's planning, programming, budgeting, and execution. And so that's where all of these requirements that we talk about start. They move through to planning, where they determine what sources, technologies, manufacturers are available, and then budgeting, and then once the budget is allocated, then they go into execution, where they start buying and deploying technology. And so in order to drive that PPB&E process, these roadmaps are developed. and they drive roadmaps and challenges, because the roadmaps drive the process and what the timing is, but the challenges drive the funding, and much of what you'll see come forward as solicitations for new work are actually addressing these challenges that have been published by the agencies that have a responsibility. One other area to look besides their planning process is their public discussion. Many of the organizations get out and publish PowerPoints. They talk at conferences, and oftentimes those are good sources to know what the issues are and at least what the current solutions that are on the table are.
Great. That is very helpful, and obviously I'm sure you could do a whole week's worth of workshops on finding those opportunities. So it's great, though, to get that kind of an overview so folks can get started in terms of identifying those opportunities. One just quick clarification I wanted to ask. You mentioned that the earlier stage, it'll be the military labs that are likely to be involved. And on your slide that was asking the question, do you need a team? One of those was completeness, and you talked about the need to look at a full life cycle from concept and testing all the way to deployment. And I wonder if you could talk to from the ARPA-E community, a lot of us are kind of in the TRL 2 to 6 stage, earlier to mid stage. And this is something that I've chatted about, thinking about how does completeness play a role even if you're in an earlier TRL level?
Sure. And so in order for a technology to be considered by DOD, it has to be feasible. And so in the early stages of TRL, where you're really reducing to practice these developments, there at least has to be a basic understanding of what the life cycle would look like. So, for instance, if it's an energy generation technology, what are the fuels going to be? Because the fuels will drive the feasibility of using this opportunity around the world. What are the expected costs going to be? Sometimes they'll back it up to are there any precious metals included in these products, because that drives volatility and also pricing. So I think at every stage there is that look at completeness. The difference is as you move through that TRL scale and become more mature, your systems have to really start coming together. And so where early on perhaps your manufacturing and your logistics is very basic. It can be manufactured in normal facilities without a lot of capital equipment. That might be adequate in an early stage TRL level. But when you're getting up to 6, 7, you better have some real manufacturing plans, have an idea of what the size is going to be in your manufacturing center. Is it done domestically or overseas? And DOD always prefers domestic. And so I think that's a scale that you're going to see change over the maturity of the product. But it's important to always have thought through that, at least initially, even in the early TRL levels.
Now that's very helpful, and I think that if folks are new to ARPA-E and you're hearing this, Deborah's description of how you engage even at an early stage with DOD, thinking about manufacturing, different input costs, that's similar to how we here at ARPA-E think about disruptive technology. Is not just can this technology solve, this particular performance issue or solve something in a vacuum, but thinking about if it's proven out, then what is the operation expense? Maybe the technology works, but how much does it cost to operate, and all those other factors. And so I think that even if you're in the early stages, this is one of those areas where working with DOE and DOD can be similar. I wanted to move to another question, kind of going back to just your experience and looking at what's been successful and hasn't. The question is, do larger awards in dollar terms go to teams versus individual entities? So I think the question here is, you've told us today if you're a small organization, you'll probably need a team. I think this person is asking, just in general, do teams tend to win more of DoD procurement opportunities, or is it tend to be larger, more integrated entities?
I'm just trying to think if I have a good reference to back up. I will tell you my opinion, but I don't know if I have good data to support it. In general, the mega awards that you see are for weapon systems, and so those go to very large, sophisticated companies. But those companies also receive the requirement for a percentage of that award to go to small businesses. So even in a very large award, if you see it going to a large company, always, if you think that you have a play, if your technology has a play in that solution, always try to plug in there, because even Electricore on our DoD programs, we receive a small business target, and we are required to meet it. And so even if you're not the prime, you may still have a play on a large award. That said, in my experience, smaller companies typically receive smaller awards because of that perceived risk that we talked about. Now, what you will see is that DoD, if it's a technology of significant interest, they will grow a company very quickly. And I can tell you an example, from AeroVironment. I started there in 1995. We're a very small company, less than 200 people, and very low sales. And we were able to develop the small UAV marketplace. And DoD started with some SBIRs, with some small orders, and then ramped us up very quickly. And we found ourselves still designated as a small business and competing on a 5-year, $500 million proposal against some large companies, and AeroVironment won. And so it does happen, but you really have to have a killer app, and you have to have the commitment in order to make it through all of those barriers to have that complete solution for the customer.
Great, that's very helpful, and I think just as you're talking about growth, starting small, and if you're fortunate enough to have win a DoD procurement, start to grow, if folks are on the phone and you haven't started a business yet, maybe you're in academia, you've got a technology, you're thinking about spinning it out. Deborah, you made a point to me earlier about when you're starting to build up your business systems, if you're just getting started. Can you talk a little bit about the trade-offs if you aren't sure you're going to work with DoD yet, but whether or not you'd want to consider building in a DoD-compliant accounting system early on, and the pros and cons of that?
Absolutely. If you have the luxury of starting fresh, and probably some of you do, take the time and build the systems from scratch that have detailed project cost accounting. And while it's required for the DoD, we're starting to see that same level of rigor come into our DOE and DOT work. And so it is so much less expensive to take that on from the beginning. So when you set up your general ledger on your cost accounting system, if you know that you're going to be doing government work, you can set up that GL with your allowables, things that can go into that the government will pay for, and your unallowables, things the government won't pay for, so that they're separated from the beginning. And it will one, put you in compliance from the start, and two, it will make it so much easier than trying to untangle things later. You probably will find yourself investing a little bit more in, perhaps rather than your local CPA, you might have to bring in a CPA that has government cost accounting experience, so you might pay a little bit more there. But overall, I think it would be far easier, and the long-term cost would be far less than starting and then having to change it later.
Great. We have a quick follow-up to that is, does QuickBooks have project or product costing modules that would comply with DoD requirements? And if not, are there other accounting applications you'd recommend?
Well, I can positively tell you that QuickBooks does comply, because that's what we use here at Electricore. And we did implement QuickBooks back in 2008. And so, yes, the modules that are offered through QuickBooks can be set up to be compliant. And keep in mind, it's more than just the accounting. It's also the internal controls. So when you're moving money, does more than one person look at it? Is it when you pay a bill, are you sure that you've actually received that work? So there's more to the systems than just accounting. But yes, QuickBooks definitely complies. There are other similar accounting systems that do. I'm an engineer, not an accountant, so I don't know them all. But I think there are lots of options, and some of the options are pretty straightforward there.
Great. No, that's really helpful. And I just want to point out for folks, if you're sitting here and just saying, hey, so this is just really additional complex accounting that's required by DOD, and the only difference is because it's complex. I think one of the things that to point out, Deborah mentioned earlier in her presentation, was the idea of if you already have a product in the market, then that's a lot easier to then establish there's a market price. You know what this costs. Versus a situation if you're doing, like we assume many of you on the phone, you're in an early stage, your technology isn't in a finished product yet. When you're getting paid for that, that requires then a different type of accounting to look at, what is the appropriate thing to charge if something doesn't have a bow on it, isn't out in the market yet. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. So if your product has been launched and sold commercially, and what you're trying to sell to DOD is identical or very similar to that, then your commercial invoice is an acceptable justification for your price. And so it is a far easier way to move forward if you're at the product stage.
Great. Well, in our remaining time, I want to just kind of move back into talking a little bit about Electricore and other resources. If folks have questions, make sure that you're submitting those through the Q&A box and selecting all panelists so we can get them. We did have a question here kind of following up saying, aside from FedBizOps, what are other websites to watch for solicitations? But I think that I kind of want to pivot that question to talk about, you've told us a little bit about Electricore, and clearly from your presentation today, you've had a lot of experience yourself and with that organization. Are there other Electricores? Are there other institutions doing what you do out there, focusing on teaming, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit or other entities, beyond the work that you all do? Who are kind of your peers in this area?
Sure. There are definitely other organizations structured like Electricore. When DARPA asked to set up Electricore, they set up 7 regional consortium, and we were one of them. Several of them are still operational. Here in California, there is CalSTART. There was one based in Atlanta. There's one based in Hawaii. There are a couple in the Northeast. And so besides those 7, there are other organizations that are set up to run like Electricore collaboratively, and some of them are nonprofit. The other thing that might be interesting is the procurement approach that DOD has taken has changed over time, and in order to actually facilitate teaming, DOD has gone to a structure where they're doing large purchasing and program development through IDIQs, an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. So this is a big contract vehicle that they put out there. They're often for 3 to 5 years long. There'll be multiple winners of an IDIQ, and then each of those IDIQ partners, it's their job to go and build winning teams. And then DOD, rather than compete in the entire marketplace, various technologies, when they have these IDIQs set up, they will send the task orders to the IDIQ teams. And so it is important to try to understand who is using the technology, and those IDIQ partners could end up being a good teaming partner for you. And so folks that typically win those IDIQs are large defense contractors. I've seen Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon hold these contracts, and so they are very open to having members join their team. You have to sign up for the amount that you'll be willing to share for them to administer the contract. and then you go into their systems, and they have their own systems where you put in your capabilities, and then that way, if a solicitation comes up in your area of excellence, they'll offer you the opportunity to bid on it. There are some other resources available to the small companies. The Small Business Association, if you haven't seen their website, it is very good. Be sure to register as a small business, and if you have, if you also qualify as a disadvantaged business or woman-owned or minority-owned, definitely go through the SBA process to do that as well. SBA does a good job of advancing the companies that they're aware of, and a lot of organizations, including our own, will go in and search that SBA database to look for companies when we're trying to recruit team members.
Great. Those are a couple of really great resources. And again, if you didn't catch all of that as she was saying it, so this is going to be recorded. You'll be able to go back and listen to the recording. One specific question here about slide 8 and looking at screening opportunities. The question is, you described how to determine if a particular opportunity is funded or not. And the person asking would like you to cover that again, how you can identify when DOD is kind of working through the different stages that you discussed in the is funding available, requirements, budgeting, appropriation, and you were emphasizing source selection. How can you identify whether or not something is funded already in the listing?
That's a good question, and sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. You have to follow up. So sometimes in the solicitation, it will be very clear that there's funding available, and they'll announce how many awards they're going to have and how much they expect to either have available to award or how much they expect each of the awards to be. But unfortunately, more common, it is not clear. And so the best way to approach that is to carefully craft a question to the contracting officer and ask, are funds allocated for this selection? And if they haven't put a dollar amount in, you could even ask, is there a target range for funding? Sometimes the contracting officer will answer that question, sometimes they cannot. They will almost always certainly answer the question if there's funds available or not. They don't always have funding targets to share with you, but you definitely want to see that because, as I mentioned, sometimes on Fed BizOps you will see information requesting products, but what they're really looking at, those are called sources sought. And so they're assessing the marketplace to understand the competition that exists there and to get some idea of pricing, but they're not at the phase of purchasing yet. So they still need to take that information back, go through their planning process, and then still put forward a requirement to be funded and go to source selection.
Great, thank you. And I think your answer to that is consistent with a common theme that, yes, there are kind of automated places online where you can find information, but there's no substitute. In fact, it sounds like a requirement through all of this that you kind of get involved in hand-to-hand communication, trying to engage the people who are in the procurement process or in the development process. One final question here, looking at I think it's going to be a similar answer, but if you're on a winning IDIQ, is there, are there ways that you can effectively follow up to see if task orders have been let out of the large company, and maybe if you have experiences with those talking to the experience of small businesses working with large companies on an IDIQ?
Yeah, in working with the IDIQs, it is tough because these are large companies that have an awful lot to do, and they need to do it efficiently. Rather than go in and maybe join all of the IDIQs, for instance, in the supply for Iraq, almost all of the supplies for that were purchased through a series of 7 IDIQs. And so rather than go in and join all 7 team members, I think it makes some sense to try to develop a relationship with a couple of them and try to get to know the subcontracting manager. Because unfortunately in those IDIQs, they're not as transparent as the government awards are. And so you really are reliant on the interface of the subcontract manager to gain information both before and after award. And so you probably want to choose your teams somewhat carefully there, and make sure you have the relationships. I also neglected to mention that as you're out there gaining information in order to decide if you're going to attempt business, one of the things that you definitely want to do is attend industry days. And so the DOD uses industry days very effectively. If they're doing a major procurement, they will invite everyone in. They'll present so that it's fair for everyone, their plans and how much funding they have and what their timing is. There's typically a question and answer period. It's a public question and answer period, which is, by law if something's under procurement. And so, but at least you have the opportunity to ask questions about the opportunity. It's not a good place to ask questions about your technology or the fit of your technology. You really want to try to do that before the solicitation comes on the street. You really want to do that in your early relationship development. But use those industry days as well. Even if you can't go there in person, use the web version of them because they're very insightful.
Great. Well, then we're out of time for questions, and just one shameless plug is Deborah is advising to use relationship building as a key part of getting into this. The ARPA-E Energy Innovation Summit we're holding every year. Our dates are announced for the 2014 summit in February, and one of the features of the summit that we try to do to get at this, beyond bringing in experts like Deborah to speak on our panels, is to bring in senior government leaders from both civilian and military services to have an open Q&A session, an open networking session, so that you can kind of break down, demystify this sort of large institution and meet a human being, talk to them, understand what their interests are in energy. So in addition to the industry days and the DOD-specific sources of information that Deborah's discussed today, if you're at a loss for where to start just building that network, I might selfishly suggest to you that the networking session with government leaders at the 2014 ARPA Energy Innovation Summit would be great. But Deborah, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for your time today and for lending your expertise. We've really appreciated it.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.